just got back from my Sunday Bible study, Bible connection, whatever you want to call it. And a question that stood out to me, throughout the whole process or a few days ago, but also through my study that reflected and came back into me off of a video idea that I also had was, what was a moment that you saw God, but it wasn't what you look like, you know? And I think back to one of my most life-changing days, September 13th. Before I checked into a game that I was told that, this is going to be a game that I believe everything changes. A belief was placed into me, and I believe through myself through months of training, through the detachment of the results and just enjoying the football. I finally got my moment. Despite I was stuck on what cleats to wear because of the field, I finally got my moment, and I could have played barefoot, and I knew I was gonna have my moment. And as I checked into this game, I don't really have rituals. I don't really do the same thing every game. I might do some similar things each game day, but only one thing stays consistent. Is that pregame that I pray in our corner flag, and then right before I check in, I pray. And in this prayer, I remember standing there right before I get called in. I'm in my prayer, and I just looked at God and I said, Lord, I'm your vessel today. Shine through me, may your will. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. Let me be your vessel today. And I ran out on the field ready to show everything that I worked for, to grasp my moment. And in that moment, he took my ACL. All in 6 minutes. I tore my ACL realistically the first play, but I played on for about another five more minutes, made another play or two, and ball went up, and I came down, and that was the wrap of my athletic career. So when I thought about it, is what is a answered prayer? You might say, oh, it wasn't a full prayer or anything like that. I think any prayer is a prayer. Asked me to use him as his vessel, and he took my ACL. And in these past few months, and even up to now, like, I'm just not entirely sure of the vessel that he's using me as. I've been battling spiritual warfare here and there, and not sure where my path may lead me. Not only because my identity as an athlete, the set things that I understood, is gone, but also the fact that I'm out of college. Do I go back? Do I focus on this? I don't want to get caught in the the trap that is set out for you. Because I strongly believe, and I know as a kid, that God is gonna use me in a lot of different ways. I remember as a kid, I've always stood out because I've always done something else. I've never, aside from on the field wearing the bright boots, I've always stood out in a different way because I didn't want to do what the norm was. The norm really never stood out to me. I didn't really care about the limelight a lot. I didn't even want to be in pictures. So in this moment where I asked him, allow me to be your vessel, shine through me, and he takes my ACL, my athletic career ends on a random Saturday in September in Pennsylvania. Even to this day, I can't completely tell you what the vessel I'm being used as, but I understand that something is brewing because his plan is, already better than mine, but who am I to question it? I've questioned it even when I went down. I remember laying there. This is the first time in my life that I've cut for a ball and it just didn't feel right. You cut for a ball, you slip, you get up and run, but when I cut for this ball and I fell down, it just felt like the entire world stopped. It was kind of like the Full Metal Alchemist scene where everything was black and he was just laying there. Goku in the hole. I was just laying there, and I'm just, wow, something's not right. I'm not necessarily in pain. Did this really just happen? But immediately it was, well, God be with me. I'm just laying there, God please, because I couldn't even believe the fact that what my reality may be. Just laying there like, all right, maybe I can get through this. God please. Like, I probably said God please 100 times in a matter of a minute before the trainer even got out to me. Even when she came out there and did the test, and I'm just laying on my back, just God, like God, this can't be the reality that you have set out for me. In the moment, this is all the things that are going through my head, and I remember hopping up and walking off the field. I'll be all right. My teammates, oh, you good, Zay? God got me. All the way home, you all right? God got me. He was been with me since that day. Even when I had the surgery, and I didn't. Some of the things that I'm doing today are still shocking because a few months ago I didn't even think I would do these things. But I understand that he's consistently molding me into something. So if you're going through something and you're not understanding why it may happen to you, you might have prayed for this not to happen. You might have prayed for everything but this to happen. You didn't even think this was the outcome of your life, your reality, but he's using this to mold you. The verse, it all may not make sense right now, but someday it will. What I'm doing someday will. And, every week now, each day now, like, I understand there's more and more reason as to why that went through that. I could sit back and say, oh, it would have been nice to have my senior season, but a lot of the things that I've learned through this process, through this journey, I don't believe I would have learned. A lot of the things that I've become grateful for and cherish, I would not have learned. So when you're sitting and you're just, I don't understand why this happened to me, through your journey, look at the things that you're learning, look at the things that are changing in you. Because he doesn't just do things to do them. God is with you in every moment, the good and the bad. Everything is a learning moment. So when I look back and I look at, I didn't necessarily think this prayer would go like that. I used to pray, ironically enough, everybody wants a house in college, with your best friends. And it was, I hope to get it, and I got that in a different light, So when you sit back and you're thinking about this question now of, dang, I did ask for this and he answered in a different way, be able to look at all the good things that have come in this different way. You probably learned so much, you've experienced so much, you might have got new opportunities that you never would have thought you would have got prior to whatever that thing is. But whatever happens next, the good and the bad, remember that God is with you. You could pray for the things, but he knows what's going to help you, what's going to change you, because you're his son, daughter, whatever that case may be. So trust in the Lord with all your heart.